We're going through the entire Bible by using a resource that's called 30 Days to Understanding the Bible by Max Anders. And I'm not sure if there's any more copies of those in the back there, but if they are there, I bought about 10. We've gone through about 60 or so. So if you want to buy one of these, let me know if you don't find one, and I'll make sure that you can get one. They're $17, and if you just put it in the plate, that's great. If you don't have $17 and still want one, that's great too. Just take one so you are able to follow along if you'd like to do that in that way. The very first era of the Bible is in the book of what? The book of what over here on this side? This side needs to be a little more vocal. Okay. There we go. The book of Genesis, and we call that the era. What happens in Genesis? Creation. Who is the main dude of creation? Adam, and this takes place in the Garden of Eden. So now we go to the next era, the era of the patriarchs. Very good. Who is the very first patriarch? Abraham. And this takes place in the land of Israel. Israel, Canaan, either one is going to be fine. So that will take us all the way through the book of Genesis. Then we're going to go to the next era called the era of the era of these signs at these doors. Very good. The era of the Exodus. Who is the main dude of the Exodus? Moses. And this takes place in the land of Egypt. Remember, we got to Egypt because of Joseph. So now we're in the land of Egypt. Remember, they wandered around in the desert for how many years? 40. And so they're at the east bank of the Jordan River. And Moses doesn't go across. Instead, it's going to be who? Joshua. His name means God saves. So they go across the Jordan River at flood stage because God stops up the river. And then they continue all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. So they're dividing and conquering. This is called the era of the conqueror. All right, Joshua is the conqueror. So now the conquest works well. And this is in the land of what? Israel. So all the tribes get divvied up some land, and they all go and do their business, and they forget about God, and what happens here is that God sends this. So we're done with the era of the conquest. The next era is the era of what color of robe do judges wear? Black. So black. It's a black time in their period, in their history. It is the era of the judges. And who's the most famous judge? The one who was really strong? Samson. And this takes place in the land of Israel. So now we're still in Israel. The people, do they like the judges? No. Who do they want instead? Kings. So now we're in the era of the monarchy, or the kingdom era. Who is the most beloved king? David. David is the most beloved king, and this takes place in the land of Israel. All right. So now, remember, God says, because all these kings, first the northern kingdom falls apart, then the southern kingdom falls apart, and God has, all during this, he sends prophets, and he keeps telling the people, either you got to shape up, or what's going to happen? You are going to shape up or ship out. Do they shape up? No, so they get shipped out. And so they go, that's called the era of the exile. The era of the exile. So they get, and where do they have to go to? They go to Babylon. So they're going to Babylon, and there, the main dude of the era of the exile is one who always did what God told him to do. And he was the one who went into the lion's den. What's his name? Daniel. All right. So now the people of Israel have been deported, and they are in Babylon. While they're in Babylon, the Persians overtake the country called Babylon, and the Persian Empire is now in control. What we read this morning was a word from the prophet Jeremiah. And Jeremiah is telling the people of Israel that God has a plan for you. Has anyone ever heard this verse before? I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. All right. It's things that you see on Pinterest or whatever, or you go into a Christian bookstore, and you think, oh, that's a wonderful, nice verse. But I want you to remember where that verse was posited, where it was placed. The people of Israel are not home. They are being forced to sing songs to, quote, make them be joyful. They are being mocked. They're being held as slaves. And it's here where God speaks through Jeremiah, and he says, I know I have a plan for you. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. What a wonderful time to hear that God has a future for us. Jeremiah prophesies to the people that, yes, you are going to be shipped out, but that exile is only going to last 70 years, and then you will go home. And so they're waiting to go home. So here we are in the period so if you get exiled, the next period is going to be what? So if you go away, what's the next time what do you got to do after you go away? You have to return. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the period of the return. And for us, there's going to be two guys, Ezra and Nehemiah. But I want you to think about returning for a moment. How many of you have ever gone away on vacation and come home to something that was a mess? This happened to us, and all of the parsonages that we have lived in, all of the folks said, we never get any water in your basement. Never any water. We should have known better when we went to the very first one and the appliances were on pallets. But when we went to Mankato, they said, oh no, we never get any water in the basement. Yes, you'll hear the sump pump run a lot because there's an underground spring nearby, so it will run nearly all year long. But no, we never get any water in your basement. So we came home, and the sump pump, I heard the sump pump running and running and running and running and running and running, but that was normative. So I went downstairs after a while, and there was this much water on the floor. What had happened was that the sump pump was running, but the pump, the little gadget or whatever, a pipe? You'll understand why Sandy has all the power tools and I have none. All right. So the pipe, the gadget thingamajigger had come loose, and so the sump pump was running, but it was pumping it all into the basement. And so here's what I did. Sandy! Yeah, that's the best thing to do. I'm going to invite you to get with one or two other folks, and I want you to talk about a time that you came home to a mess. I don't care. Maybe it was a mess your dog did. Maybe it's a mess that you found in the neighbor's yard. Maybe you went through I don't know. But talk about a time that you came home to a mess. And I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to talk about it. Here's the deal, friends. All right. So if I would really encourage you to go meet somebody you've never met before. Make sure you get their names and everything. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. If you don't want to move, that's fine. If you don't want to talk to anybody, this is what you do if you don't want to talk to anybody. And they will leave you alone. Okay? Now, I'm serious. If you don't want to talk to anybody, just look down, or if someone asks, just say thanks, but I'm going to just think about this on my own. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes, and I'll give you time to do it right now. Go. got about 1 minute left, 1 minute. Thirty seconds left. So the people of Israel are, they're over in Babylon. They were deported from Israel. They were deported in 3 waves. So they first took some of the youngest and the brightest, and they took them first, and then they took another wave, and then they took another wave. And although there were some, very few, that were able to stay back in the land, the majority were taken over to Babylon. And so for 70 years, they were held in captivity. And what happens is that the Babylonians who had taken over, now the Persians come into control. Now the Persians, they have a different kind of foreign policy than the Babylonians did. The Persians, King Cyrus, he's the one that we hear about. King Cyrus decides, well, what I'd like to do is all these people who are foreign folks in this land, we're going to say that you can go back to your homes if you'd like to. You can go back to your home country. Now, I want you to think about, because imagine here if after 70 years, someone came to you and said, you can go back to the countries from which your ancestors were from. Well, some of them decide, well, I don't really want to go back there. Some of them got married and had kids with some of the folks who were Persians. And so they said, well, I think we'll just stay. And there were some who said, we are going back home. Well, Ezra, he goes to King Cyrus and he says, I would like to lead an expedition that would go back to Israel. We're going to need a little extra money, King. And so King Cyrus says, okay, well, I'll give you some money. I'll give you money to begin some of this work. Plus, I know that when you go back home, you're going to find that it's been 70 years since you've been at the temple. And so pretty much a lot of the stuff that was in your temple, we got. We got your gold stuff that you all had, and some of it we melted down, but some we still have. So I'll send that back with you. Cyrus was a smart guy. He wasn't doing this just to those who were from Israel. He was having those kind of policies to anybody who was inside of Persia now and wanted to go back. He knew that they would know those kinds of places a lot better than if the Persians went over there. They would know where the best farmlands would be. They would know, oh yeah, they could start up that business again. And he knew that he could collect a lot more taxes if they were happy. So he sends them back. So Ezra comes back and he leads the people, and sure enough, when they get into Jerusalem, the temple has been destroyed. There is really nothing that they can really keep. Now, not only is the temple destroyed, but their houses have been destroyed. The city walls around the whole city, that's in all rubble and ruin. And Ezra, what he wants to do is he wants to get the people excited about building God's house. So I want you to think for a moment that you are part of this expedition back. And you come home, and if you're like me, the first thing that you would do is you'd go to your house, right? Or if you were younger and you didn't have a house in Israel, but it was your grandparents' house or your parents' house, you'd go and you'd look at the house. And you go, oh, how could this have happened? And then you would start the hard task of rebuilding. Now Ezra is trying to get everybody excited about building the church. He's saying, we came back here because God said that I have a plan for you. Plans to prosper and plans not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. But when they came back, they saw their house and they started to rebuild. One of the churches that I served, it was the last church I served, they had literally built the church. So the people of the church literally built the church. They didn't have contractors and so forth. They had subcontractors who did some of the work, but by and large, they built the church. So they built it, and people were coming, and it was getting excited, and they were getting crowded in that place. So they said, well, okay, now we need to go to phase 2. So we need to build this other side of the church. So they started on that part, and then what happened was the leadership of the church, the pastor of the church, did something he wasn't supposed to do. And so he went. And the people who had looked at that pastor as their leader, and he also oversaw the whole building project, they went, and they weren't excited about building anymore. But here was this part of the church that was started to be built, but there was nothing going on anymore. Now I want you to think of somebody like an Ezra coming before you and saying, friends, we need to build this church. Yeah, the pastor is gone. The person that we relied on for that leadership is gone, but God is still with us. We need to build the church. How many of you ever been in a church where they've asked you for money? How many of you get weary of it? Yeah, that's not quite as funny. That's where these folks are at, friends. It's easy to do when there's all kinds of excitement, but when things are falling in the crapper, it's hard to do. And that's where we are in the return. Ezra is trying to fire up the people. Let's build it. And so he gets enough people that they finally build a foundation. They build the floor of the temple. Now, this temple is not nearly as big as Solomon's temple. It's not going to be, it's a lot smaller. They don't have the funds to do it. The grant has run out. But he gets them to build that much. And then the people go off and they start building their homes. Now their homes, they build a lot nicer homes than their ancestors had. Ezra says they had these nice paneled walls. And finally Ezra gets in front of the congregation and he says, this is what God sees. He sees us all in our nice houses, but we have no desire to do anything more for God than to just build them a floor. It's time for us, friends, to honor God and build this house for Him. And so the people start to build. And that's kind of what happened in Spicer as well. The people went, but they were tired. So they decided, we'll do it through other folks this time. And it wasn't as grandiose as they once first thought it was going to be. But they said, this is a place that we can worship God in. So the temple gets built, smaller. And now Nehemiah is back in Persia. Nehemiah is a Jew. He keeps getting these telegrams from home. And the telegrams keep saying, okay, yeah, the temple's built. It's not as big. It took a lot of gumption to get the people to finally do it, but they did it. But I got to tell you, Nehemiah, that the walls around the city, they're still in ruin. Now, the walls around the city were pretty important. The walls around the city, first of all, meant that's a way that they were protected. But it's another thing that said that's just, every city has walls around it. Shouldn't God's city have walls around it? Read Revelation, okay? You'll find that God's city does have walls around it. In any case, so Think of our town for a moment. Think of that if Main Street was in road repair, and 610 you couldn't get across the river, and 169 you couldn't get across the river because those bridges were out, and Hanson Boulevard was in road repair. Can you imagine what it would be like to get here? That's kind of like what it usually is every summer. And so Nehemiah asks for another government grant. This time it's a different king, so he figures, well, in a new administration, maybe I can get a little more money. So Artaxerxes says, okay, I'm going to give you money to give you the stuff, but you got to raise your own labor force. So Nehemiah comes, and everybody's in their houses, and the temple is up, and now he says, okay, now we're going to rebuild the walls. And the people of Israel went, oh, what? Now we got to do this? He said, we need to rebuild the wall. Get up on the wall. And like so many of us, there is that sense of, oh. And then there's that sense of, okay, let's do it. Now I want you to be mindful about how all these things have happened. When God rebuilds the temple, did God just suddenly bring the temple down out of heaven and place it on the ground? No. When the walls are rebuilt around the city of Jerusalem, and they get rebuilt, does God construct them and bring them down from heaven and put them around them? No. God uses people. God uses us. When Sandy and I, we're going to go away for our vacation at the end of August and the first week of September. And when we come home, Sandy's a great packer. She can move and when we come home, we'll pull in the garage, and there will be all that stuff that needs to go in the house. And I will get out, and I will go to my flowers. And I will look at all the flowers that need deadheading. Does anyone like the deadhead flowers? Some of you like the deadhead flowers. I don't particularly like it, but I know that I need to do it in order for the flowers to look better again. So I'll let Sandy unpack the car graciously, because she's very good at that. And I will go around deadheading the flowers. You see, we all have different gifts, don't we? All right. I will get the stuff out of the van and put it in the house, and she can put it away. All right. Mostly. The flowers just drive me nuts. We all have different gifts. And God calls upon us to use those gifts not only to bring joy to ourselves, but to bring honor and glory to Him. And that is always how God works. I want you to remember that when you think about the return, that God is constantly using people to do what needs to be done. That's what we're here for. We are here to use the gifts that God has given us to bring glory to Him and to serve His purpose. And God's people said, amen. Let's stand and sing.